Hey guys, what's happening? So, after talking some Cosmic Ghost Rider and his new standalone series, which is showing an insane amount of potential, and a lot of that's to the credit that he was created and written by Donny Cates, who is also doing the Venom series, which I mentioned a while back that we will dive into. And even though it's early, I really feel like this is going to be one of my favorite Venom runs. And I know that is a bold statement, but man, early on, this is so good. And when I say my favorite, that does take into account in this series in 2018, which I believe is the 4th volume, as in the 4th volume of the Venom standalone series. But at this point, with Donny Cates introducing Knull, the god of the symbiotes, a huge reason why this story is turning out to be so good is because as a retcon, it's not throwing away the history, the long history that we already have with the Venom symbiote. And to me, that is extremely important. And it's a huge credit to the previous stories because this one builds off a lot of that history, which was one of my biggest problems with Venomverse. And the reason why I didn't do really videos on Venomverse, one, because I don't essentially do videos on every series I read, and for the most part when I mention Venomverse, I've used it as a reference because some of it does tie into the main continuity. But as a whole, and I mean all of it, Edge of Venomverse, Venomized, Venomverse, War Stories, really all of it, it just really didn't pull me in because I feel like the character arcs were real disposable. But overall, it looked great, and the effects of that event still carry over into your Prime Earth, so that's the main reason why I still make references to it. But just out of curiosity, let me know in the comments what you guys thought about Venomverse, like the whole thing, Edge of Venomverse, Venomized, all of that. But as far as the history of Knull, the god of the symbiotes, the lord of the abyss, the Venom series picks up really just getting right into it. And where it starts off, Eddie Brock, he's seeing the nightmares of his symbiote, and he admits that he didn't even know that his symbiote could have nightmares. And when he sees it with all these Norse warriors barricading themselves in trying to get away from this symbiote, and they're calling out for Beowulf, who they cannot get to in time. This really confuses Eddie because he's not really sure, is this a dream, is this a vision? But eventually he does figure out that it's coming from the symbiote, who he's trying to console, thinking that the storm outside is what has him rattled. But when he talks to him, he's like, nah, you saw that? Because the symbiote, who he refers to as a shadow, he's freaked out by the exact same thing. And really, neither one of them knew until this moment that the symbiote could actually have dreams or nightmares. Because the whole idea of these two guys being shook, that just doesn't happen. But because of the trouble and the disruption going on with the symbiote, Eddie's been taking these pills to quiet down the voice, mainly so he can concentrate. And really, until Eddie figures out what the problem is, this is just a method he's been using, so as Venom they can still go out and be effective and have some level of focus. And I love that we get the struggle of him not wanting to do this. And when he does, the symbiote is begging him not to shut him out. But really, it's just one of those cases to where we have to tone this down until we find a solution because there's other things that we still need to do. And it's not too long after that Eddie hears a police radio call for backup saying that they recently spotted Jack-o'-lantern headed into this warehouse. And Eddie's been keeping tabs on Jack-o'-lantern for some time now, so when he hears this lead, he goes straight to that location. But the crazy thing is, like, this is not the original Jack-o'-lantern. It's really just a guy dressed up in this suit trying to sell some guns. And it's really not the best idea on his part to dress up as somebody who's wanted for way worse than what you're doing, because then when you get caught, what are you gonna do? Like, you're just stuck. But I would also say that I believe the original Jack-o'-lantern set this guy up in order to cover his own tracks. Because after seeing this imposter shoot a cop and just try to run away, which really isn't the real Jack-o'-lantern's MO, like shooting people and running away on foot. Like, he's a bit more advanced than that, I'll just leave that there. But when he gets caught, like I said, he's just like, I'm not that guy, I'm not the real one. And really, he couldn't have picked the worst time to do this, because as of right now, with Eddie and the symbiote having these issues, Venom as a whole is very unstable. And it's not just the nightmares, but it's also the symbiote's bloodlust that Eddie's been wrestling with, trying to keep it under control. But when they get their hands on this guy, like, it's a wrap. And I'll say, even as a hero, Venom doesn't mind getting rough with the bad guy, and he clearly doesn't want to hurt the officers. But what happens in this alley here goes completely beyond Eddie's control, because they start speaking the same language of the creature in their nightmare, and the Venom symbol on his chest changes to that which resembles a dragon. And at this point, it's like Eddie doesn't even know his shadow anymore, because for a moment, neither one of them are in control. But one thing I also got to point out right here is that this reminds me a lot of at least the look of the symbiotes that we saw back in like 2015 in Marvel's Contest of Champions, where the Ultimates had to go against them to defeat Maestro. At least I think that's what they were called at the time. And they were like half Void, half Venom, or half Symbiote, but the look of this brainwashed Venom, if you will, really took me back to that issue. But when they turn around and they're facing the cops who are shooting at him, before Venom could do them any harm, a sniper from a few buildings over shoots a device on top of his head, which Eddie thought was going to kill them, and he wanted to be stopped before he would have hurt the police. So as soon as he saw something was on his head, he was like, yo, do it. But as it turned out, it was more of a device set to disable the symbiote and blind the officers so that this unknown person could get Venom out of there without killing the officers. And I'm not gonna front, when I seen that blast, I thought they all was dead. But what we find out is the guy that disabled Venom and brought him in is a guy named Rex Strickland. And you can tell pretty quick that he knows his way around a symbiote. And most of it is because the way that he's disabled Eddie Brock. Because one, in this basement, he has a signal going off at a frequency only the symbiote could hear, which makes it difficult for the symbiote to properly form around Eddie. But on top of that, he has him tied up directly in front of a furnace, which is keeping the room at a high temperature. And so now Rex Strickland is former military. He had previously fought in the Vietnam War, and at the time that he brought in Eddie Brock, he actually thought he was bringing in Flash Thompson. And part of that plays into the fact that a lot of the intel that he's gathered himself is older information. So he assumed at this current time that Flash Thompson was still in the Black symbiote, possibly unaware of him operating as Agent Venom, and depending on the time of this story, unaware that he's now dead. And hopefully he'll make it back somehow, some way. I just don't want him to stay gone. And I'm pretty sure the timeline of this narrative falls in after the death of Flash Thompson. But that's something we won't know for sure till later on after the story unfolds. Because Flash's funeral was pretty big. I don't know how Rex would have missed that. But even with Rex mistaking Eddie Brock for Flash Thompson, at this point in time, I'll go as far to say that Rex probably knows more about symbiotes than Eddie Brock has forgotten in his life. Because it's here where he tells Eddie about a super soldier program where the US military bonded soldiers with symbiotes. And this is a program where he was fortunate enough to get out of, but his friends, they weren't so lucky. But this is also the reason he wanted Flash Thompson's help, because he had reason to believe that his fellow veterans were alive and he wanted to save them from the program as well, but he couldn't do it by himself. And since he has Eddie here, he's pretty much like, okay, we'll just go with what we got. And so what he does is he sends Eddie to this underground transport that's often used by S.H.I.E.L.D. to transport their highly dangerous assets. And after stopping their payload, Eddie's met by the soldiers who have been permanently bonded with their symbiotes and placed on ice because they were the payload for this transport. But when he sees them, they're under the same influence that his symbiote was struggling with, and he eventually finds out that the veterans that they were using as hosts, they're already dead. But once again, these symbiotes are saying the same chant that he heard from the nightmare. And as they approach him, that same influence causes his shadow to leave him defenseless. And it really just puts him in this place of, okay, there's really no time to do anything but defend himself. Just knowing that this could only go bad. And it does. And he gets impaled and just left there for dead. And they don't stick around. They leave saying the same chant, but by this time, Eddie's shadow is snapped out of it, and he literally reaches inside Eddie to put him back together, sending oxygen to his red blood cells, connecting arteries, acting as a bandage, and even manually jump-starting his heart. And the whole time that he's doing this for Eddie, he's just apologizing because he knows he couldn't control what he was doing. And I gotta admit, this was crazy to see because the Venom symbiote got as precise as a surgeon and continued to act as a crutch in order to keep him alive. And so later on, as you can guess, he wasn't too happy when he seen Rex again, because initially when he seen him again, he lashed out because he felt like he was set up. But when he came back and lashed out, his words kind of blended with that chant that he'd heard in his dreams, the same words that the symbiotes keep saying over and over again that make no sense, at least not to Eddie. And while stitching him together, the Venom symbiote tried to tell him it finally figured out what it was saying, but at that time Eddie wasn't even conscious, and after 20 hours of putting him back together and later slipping in and out of this influence, by the time they get back to Rex and he hears the words, when the Venom symbiote loses itself and attacks him, he remembers not only what it means, but who it is exactly. Because back in the Vietnam War, as a part of Project Rebirth, from the same guys who brought you Captain America, I just see like the advertisement like that. But at that time, Rex was among a few soldiers who were selected for this program, and he had been shot up and burned prior to by the Viet Cong when he had tried to buy time for his fellow troops to dig a trench. But seeing that he had survived, Nick Fury also brought him into Project Rebirth, where he was bonded with samples from an ancient symbiote that S.H.I.E.L.D. had discovered. And it was from that that bonding where he was shown this revelation that this sample had came from something much older than the stars, and dark, with memories of bringing horrors across countless civilizations across the universe. But it was at this moment he heard a voice speak, "God is coming." And it was in the same language that he heard the Venom symbiote speak, the same language from the dreams that Eddie and the symbiote had earlier, where the men who were devoured were calling out for Beowulf, who's actually the one who defeated this creature and caused him to sleep for centuries. And if I'm not mistaken, like the last time that we saw Beowulf was Civil War II in a Gods of War tie-in. I believe that's the most recent time. If anybody has an appearance more recent, let me know down in the comments. But I believe that was the most recent. And at that time during Civil War II, and what's funny is I keep getting these comments for somebody saying that you gotta talk about Hercules. And if I see her posted again, I'll definitely pin it under this video. But at that time during Civil War II, Hercules had called in Beowulf because he needed his help to bring down a group called the Uprising Storm. And really the whole plot of that series, Gods of War, it was really just the old gods versus new gods kind of thing. And this new group called the Uprising Storm, they were really just taking their shot at overthrowing the old gods, and Hercules was having trouble, so he called Beowulf in to give him some help. And that's really the main gist of it. And it's really one of those tie-ins that kind of tries to go on a huge scale, but the Uprising Storm, they're a bit underwhelming, to say the least. And that reaction could very much be just my fault, because I may have gone into that kind of having the expectation of a old gods versus new gods on a DC type level, and Gods of War just wasn't that. But after talking to Rex and learning more about the symbiote god, Eddie showed Rex the breaking news that, okay, this guy is awake now, and he is collecting symbiotes, presumably eating them, and it's only a matter of time before he comes directly for Venom. But when Venom goes to confront this symbiote god, he is kicked in the back by Miles Morales, who of course can cloak himself to seem invisible. But I love that when Venom gets here first, that he's soon met by Miles. Because as far as Miles Morales is concerned, there is no Venom anti-hero. Like, the Venom he remembers from the 1610 universe is the Venom that's responsible for the death of his mother. And even though Molecule Man brought her back after Secret Wars, like, witnessing the death of his mother is something that he will never forget. And her standing up to that Venom with no powers, begging that Venom to let her son go. And as that Venom from the 1610 universe was about to consume her as well, Miles broke out using his Venom Blast, separating that symbiote from the host. And when the police had opened fire, his mother had been hit. So as far as any mention of Venom, this is the memory that he ties to it. And even with him being on a prime Earth, that is a completely different universe from the 1610. Just the sight of Venom brings all of this back to him. And because of that, you can just imagine his thought process when he meets Eddie Brock for the first time. Because the death of his mother made him not want to be Spider-Man anymore. So you can just imagine with him meeting Venom now, in this new universe where he's gotten used to having his mother back again, that when he sees Venom, he's just gonna want to take him out. And in this universe, Miles knows who Venom is, or I should say he knows of Venom. Eddie Brock does not know Miles Morales at this point. But after Miles initiates the fight and the symbiote slips back into the influence of the god of the symbiotes, Miles rips out his tongue and shoots a Venom Blast into his mouth. And when he does this, it stops the whole hypnotized symbiote thing from going on, which is pretty important because this fully disarmed Eddie from his symbiote, which is a good thing. I mean, not for Eddie at the moment, but it was because of this that they realized they had something that they could use to fight back. Because up until this point, this god symbiote and even the symbiotes that came from him, like fire, wasn't even harming them. And at this point, they weren't even sure if the Venom Blast was like a short shot to finish everything, but it was definitely worth trying. And eventually Eddie convinced Miles to put his differences aside because he kept telling him, like, look, I'm not the same Venom that came from where you're from. And if you still don't like me, cool, we can handle that later. But for now, we need to take care of this thing. And by take care of it, Eddie pretty much meant causing Miles to swing right into the mouth of that thing so he could let off his Venom Blast from the inside. And I'm guessing he got that idea from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Probably not, but that's what it made me think of. But what's crazy is it actually worked, to the extent of taking down the larger symbiote and revealing who was inside, which was the avatar of the symbiote god himself. And he's just holding an unconscious Miles by the head like a little doll or something. because depending on the size of the Venom blast, they take a lot of energy from Miles. And that's why after a blast that big, he's just out cold. But even still, after taking that blast, this guy catches a chopper like it's a piece of candy and he just breaks it, controlling the falling symbiote with just a simple gesture. And he does this while simultaneously calling back the Venom symbiote into his control, which Eddie fights and resists, but it doesn't do much here because the symbiote god, he's remotely controlling this body and this symbiote. And then he does what Eddie has feared the worst, by taking the Venom symbiote from him, separating them once again. And when Knull does this, he does show his hand a little bit. And I say that because he mentions that it's too loud. And as a result, he covers them all inside of this dome of sorts, isolating them from the outside sounds of the rest of New York. But his reason for taking the Venom symbiote is he claims that the symbiote needs to be purged because it's been corrupted by humanity. And when Eddie hears the symbiote screaming, he tries to stop Knull, but Knull grabs him by the throat and begins to bond with him because Knull wants to show Eddie, much like Rex was shown in Vietnam, that he is Knull, Lord of the Abyss and God of the Symbiotes. Man, I just love the way that this series is starting, and I can't wait to see who else they're gonna bring in. Like, I would love to see like a Jessica Drew crossover within this, mainly just to see what effect her powers would have against someone like this, because from what it looks like, your conventional means aren't gonna do much any good. So aside from Miles and possibly the return of Beowulf, and definitely Eddie Brock's gonna try to figure what he can to save his symbiote. But last thing, this retcon does put me in the mind state of what DC's currently doing with the Dark Gods, which is just another great example of a retcon done right, when you take the source material and you fill in the gaps with something new instead of just retelling the same story all over again. And I feel like that's being accomplished very well in this new Venom series. Like, Donny Cates chose well taking this route, so make sure you are grabbing this one when it hit the shelves. Like, I think the latest one is probably dropping today, so be sure to put this one in your weekly pull, or bi-weekly in this case. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.